Montana Territory, August 1876. The dust hit the rise before the wagon did, and when it finally creaked into view, it looked near to falling apart. One wheel wobbled like a drunk step, and the canvas cover was torn clean through in places, flapping in the dry wind. A woman sat high on the bench seat, reins in hand, though the horses pulled slow and tired. Two children huddled in the back, thin, silent, watching. Isaiah Prescott leaned on the fence rail, wiping sweat off his brow with the back of his arm. He had been hauling hay since dawn, but the sight of that wagon stopped him cold. Something in the way the woman held herself rigid, proud, like a tree stripped bare but still standing, held his eyes. She pulled up near the barn, dust settling around her like a sigh. The horses stopped without being asked. The woman climbed down, her skirt catching on a nail, tearing the hem. She did not flinch. She turned toward Isaiah and met his eyes. "My name is Marabeth Clarke," she said. "I need work and a place to sleep. I can cook so clean. I am not afraid of hard labor." Isaiah glanced at the children. A boy no older than 6 and a girl maybe 8, both barefoot, both clinging to one another like they had known too many hard miles. He stepped forward. "You got 2 little ones, you running from something?" Marabeth straightened. "Their father left us in Kansas, took all our money. I came west because there was nothing else." Isaiah nodded once. "You can stay. For now, I got a bunkhouse and a cook stove. The roof leaks, but it is dry enough by Montana standards." She blinked as if she had not expected him to say yes. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said. "You came with your children and your shame. I see only treasure." Marabeth's breath caught. She looked away, jaw tight, but her shoulders lowered a little. The children stayed quiet as Isaiah helped unload the wagon. The boy, Peter, kept close to his sister, Phoebe. They did not speak much, just watched, like animals not yet sure they were safe. The bunkhouse was rough lumber and crooked nails, but it had walls and a stove. Isaiah laid fresh blankets on 2 cots and gave the children the one near the wall. Marabeth set her jaw and unpacked a small bundle of clothes with careful hands. That first night, they ate cornbread and beans by lantern light. Marabeth did not speak unless spoken to. Her eyes never lingered on Isaiah long. But when Phoebe dropped her spoon, Marabeth reached out, steadying her hand, and whispered, "It's all right, baby. No one's going to hurt you here." Isaiah heard it. He pretended not to. By the end of the week, Marabeth had scrubbed the bunkhouse clean and patched a hole in the roof with old canvas. She rose before sunrise, had coffee hot by the time he came in from the fields, and kept to herself unless the children needed something. Isaiah watched her from a distance, her quiet strength, her fierce love, and wondered what kind of man had ever walked away from that. One afternoon, as storm clouds gathered over the hills, Phoebe came running from the barn, hair wild, crying. Marabeth dropped her sewing and ran outside, Isaiah close behind. "He is stuck in the hayloft," Phoebe sobbed. "Peter climbed up and now he cannot get down." Inside the barn, Peter clung to a beam, feet dangling, too afraid to move. "I will get him," Isaiah said, but Marabeth was already moving. She climbed the ladder like she had done it 100 times before, her boots steady on the rungs. "Peter," she said softly, reaching for him. "Look at me, just me, I have you." He sobbed and reached for her. She pulled him in, one arm around his back, and carried him down slow, step by careful step. Back on the ground, she held him until he stopped shaking. Then she looked up and saw Isaiah watching. "I was a rancher's daughter," she said, "before I met him, before everything changed." Isaiah nodded. "Looks like being a mother just made you stronger." Her eyes flickered, something warm breaking through the guarded lines of her face. That night, as the rain pounded on the roof, Isaiah brought in more firewood and stayed a while longer in the bunkhouse. The children slept. Marabeth sat sewing a tear in Peter's shirt. "You were right," she said, not looking up. "I carried shame all the way from Kansas, every mile of it. People looked at me like I was something broken." He sat across from her, elbows on knees. "You are not broken." She finally met his gaze. "Why are you being kind to us?" "Because I know what it feels like to be left behind," he said. My folks died when I was 10. I bounced from place to place until I built this ranch. I know what it means to fight for something better." She looked down, blinked slowly. "You make it sound easy." "It is not, but it is possible." For the first time she smiled, not big, just enough to change her face entirely. Her eyes softened and she let out a breath like she had been holding it for years. The fire crackled. Rain tapped the windows gentle now. Isaiah stood and crossed to the door but paused. "You and those kids. You belong here if you want to stay." She did not answer, but she did not look away either. And that was the start. The wind shifted in early September, brushing the grass flatter and cooler than before. The days still burned, but the mornings came sharp with a bite that hinted at the long winter ahead. Isaiah noticed Marabeth had started rising even earlier before the rooster, before the light tending chores without a word and with a kind of quiet urgency that hadn't been there before. One morning he found her in the chicken pen, sleeves rolled up, hands red from scrubbing the trough. A pale line marked where her wedding ring must have once sat, but the skin was hard there now, toughened by work. "You've got the hens looking cleaner than me," Isaiah said, leaning one elbow over the fence. She didn't stop working. "I don't like waste, and I don't like dirt in my eggs." Isaiah watched her rinse her hands in the barrel, then wipe them dry on her skirt. "You ever think about building something here? For yourself and the children, I mean, not just passing through." Marabeth's eyes flicked up. "I think about what's necessary. Building's a luxury." He stepped aside as she came through the gate, her braid loose and damp down her back. "I've got cedar boards in the shed. Been sitting there 2 years since I tore out the old corral. If you've got a mind to build something, I'll help." She hesitated at that one heartbeat too long. "You're not in Kansas anymore," he added. "I know where I am," she said, voice even. "And I know what it cost to get here." Later that week, Isaiah returned from the far pasture with a splinter in his palm and tension in his shoulders from driving a post into rocky soil. He found Marabeth kneeling beside the stove, coaxing heat into a pot of turnips and salt pork. Phoebe was sewing patches onto Peter's trousers with the same crooked stitch her mother used. "Storms coming in from the west," Isaiah said, sitting near the hearth, working at the splinter with his knife. Marabeth didn't look up. "I noticed the sky." He glanced at her hands. "You still carry yourself like you're waiting for something worse." She set her spoon down. "Because worse always came. Not here." She turned then, one hand braced against her knee. "You talk like you can control the world." "No," he said, "but I can control what happens on this land. If you want to stay, I'll make sure it's safe." Her mouth parted, but she said nothing. Just nodded once, like that promise had weight. That night, the wind howled through the cracks in the walls and the children crawled into the cot together without being told. Isaiah stayed late again, sharpening tools by the fire. Marabeth didn't ask him to leave. As he packed up his things to go, she wrapped a cloth around a small loaf of cornbread and held it out. For the next day's work, he took it, fingers brushing hers. "You're feeding me now. You feed the ones who feed you," she said, and her voice was softer than before. The next morning, she found him working by the barn, driving nails through fresh cedar into the start of a frame. He didn't hear her approach until her shadow passed across his boots. "You weren't lying about those boards." "I don't lie." She looked over the frame. "You building a shed or a story?" He stood, wiping his brow with his sleeve. "Well, that depends. If you help me, it might just be a home." She folded her arms. "What makes you think I'd want that?" Isaiah met her gaze. "Because you're still here. And because you look at your children like you want them to believe the world can be better than what you've known." She didn't answer, but she picked up a hammer from the ground and held it like it belonged to her. By dusk, they had the start of a wall. Peter handed them nails with solemn concentration while Phoebe swept dust away from the base. When they stopped to eat, Isaiah handed Marabeth a tin mug of coffee, and she didn't pass it back right away. "I never expected to find steadiness again," she said, watching her children play near the woodpile. "You didn't find it," he said. "You built it." This time she looked him full in the face. "You're different than any man I've known." Then maybe it's time you knew a different kind. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It settled like something understood but not yet spoken aloud. And when the stars came out, they stood side by side beneath them, both watching the frame of the house take shape in the dark. By late September, the light had turned gold and long, casting slow-moving shadows across the valley floor. Work on the new house moved steady, not fast, but sure-footed, like all good things that held. Isaiah cut and laid each board with care. Marabeth measured and marked without needing to be told. They didn't speak much while they worked, but the silence felt companionable now, not cautious. The children played nearby, their voices weaving through the hammering and sawing like birdsong. One afternoon, Isaiah returned from the creek with his boots soaked and his hat dripping. He stepped into the half-built frame, where Marabeth was smoothing the edge of a window casing with a rasp. "There's a downed pine across the north fence. Looks like it's been rotting a while. I'll need to clear it before the cattle wander." She set the rasp down and brushed sawdust from her skirt. "I'll help. I've handled an axe before." "I don't doubt it," he said, then added, "but the ground's soft from the rain. Could turn slick. I'd rather not see you take a spill." Marabeth narrowed her eyes. "I didn't come here to be told to sit still." Isaiah leaned against the frame, the damp brim of his hat casting a shadow across his brow. "I know, just saying I'd rather have you whole than proving a point." She paused, then gave a short nod. "Then let me fix supper while you're out there." "We'll both do what we're good at," he met her eyes. "That's fair." By the time he came back, the sun had dropped low and the air smelled of onions and thyme. The table inside the bunkhouse was set, simple but neat, with a clean cloth and the tinware polished. Phoebe and Peter had washed their faces, and Marabeth had braided her hair up off her neck. Her sleeves were rolled, wrists smudged with flour, but her face was calm in a way it hadn't been before. Isaiah washed at the basin and took his seat with a quiet thanks. As they ate, Peter asked about wolves, and Isaiah told a story about an old trapper who once mistook a coyote for a dog and tried to bring it home. The children laughed, and even Marabeth let out a low chuckle. After supper, while the children played with bits of chalk out by the barn wall, Isaiah stayed behind, drying the tin cups. Marabeth folded the dishcloth, her hands moving slower than usual. "I didn't think I'd ever feel settled again," she said, not looking up. "Even when things were decent before, I always felt like I owed someone something, like I was living on borrowed time." "You don't owe me," Isaiah said. "Not for the house, not for the food, not for staying." She let the cloth fall into the basket. "That's the part I can't quite get used to." "Not being measured." He stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "You're not being measured, you're being seen." Her fingers curled slightly at her sides. "And what do you see?" He didn't rush the answer. "A woman who came through fire and didn't burn up. A mother who keeps her children safe without making them afraid. Someone who doesn't ask for more than she gives." She looked at him then, eyes steady. "I don't know how to be looked at like that." "Then let me be the first." Outside, Peter called out to Phoebe, and the moment shifted, but it didn't vanish. Marabeth stepped past him, opened the door, and stood watching the children for a long while. That night, Isaiah walked back to his own quarters, the moonlight silvering the grass. He didn't sleep right away. He sat on the edge of his bunk, boots still on, thinking of the way she'd stood in the doorway, the light from the hearth catching the curve of her cheek, the strong line of her jaw. Autumn came down hard the next week. The trees along the ridge turned brittle yellow, and a frost dusted the fields before sunrise. Isaiah brought in the last of the squash and hung salt pork in the smokehouse. Marabeth began stitching heavier coats from old canvas and wool scraps. She didn't ask for help, he didn't offer. But every evening they sat a little longer by the fire after the children had gone quiet. One night, as the wind rattled dry leaves against the window panes, Isaiah looked across the table at Marabeth, her face lit soft by lamplight, and said, "I've been thinking about putting up a porch once the walls are done." She raised a brow. "Why a porch?" "So you have a place to sit come spring when the grass comes green again. somewhere to rest without needing a reason. She watched him, silent for a breath. Then, that sounds like something a man builds for someone he means to keep. Isaiah didn't look away. Maybe it is. She stood slowly and crossed to where her coat hung near the door, fingers brushing over the hem. She didn't speak, but when she turned, there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, quiet trust. Isaiah reached for the lantern and lowered the flame. Neither of them said more that night. They didn't need to. Some things, once planted, grow best in stillness. The roof went on just before the first snow. Isaiah nailed down the final shingle while Marabeth stood below, her arms folded against the cold. Phoebe and Peter crouched beside her, watching with the quiet reverence children reserve for things they sense matter deeply. The sky above was hard and pale. The wind carried the scent of distant wood smoke and something deeper, earthier, that told of frozen ground not far off. Inside, the new house smelled of fresh pine and ash from the stove Isaiah had hauled in from the trading post in Miles City. The walls were bare still, but solid. The windows were small, but they caught the light. Marabeth swept the floor with a bundle of tied twigs, her motion steady, her eyes more settled than he'd seen them. When Isaiah stepped in, brushing sawdust from his sleeves, she didn't straighten or step aside. She simply said, "You built the door too square, it doesn't stick," he grinned. "I figured you'd want something that didn't fight you," she looked up at him then. "I'm not used to things giving way." "You'll get used to doors that open," he said. That night, they moved the children's bedding into the new house. Phoebe insisted on choosing the corner nearest the stove. Peter asked if the walls would hold against storms, and Marabeth only had to say yes once. Isaiah brought in an oil lamp and a kettle. No ceremony, no speeches. Just warmth and a roof, and the feeling of something beginning. Later, after the children had fallen asleep, Marabeth stood at the threshold, staring out over the dark field. Her hands were wrapped around a mug of steeped mint, gathered from Creekside weeks before. Isaiah watched her from the table where he was mending the strap of a saddlebag. "You're quiet," he said, her voice came low. "I keep waiting to feel like I don't belong." He set the needle down and rose. "And do you?" She looked at him, and this time there was no hesitation in her answer. "I think I'm beginning to." The wind moaned faintly against the eaves. He stood beside her, close enough to feel the heat of her through the wool of her shawl. "My mother used to say that belonging isn't found," he said. "It's built like fences and homes and peace." Marabeth's eyes searched his face. "Did she teach you how to hold people without breaking them?" "No," he said, voice quiet. "I learned that from being dropped." She reached out, fingers brushing his wrist, not a claiming, not a plea, just a touch. He covered her hand with his, the weight of it gentle, certain. "You don't have to keep bracing," he said. "I don't know how not to," she whispered. He leaned in, slow as the sun's rising. "Then lean, I'll hold." She didn't pull away. The next morning, a thin layer of snow dusted the porch. Isaiah found Peter out front, trying to catch flakes on his tongue. Phoebe was crouched beside the well, marveling at the way the frost clung to the rope. Marabeth was inside, packing flour into a crock, her sleeves pushed up, her hair still damp from washing. Isaiah came in, brushing snow from his shoulders. "I've been thinking we might start keeping a few hens in the lean-to through winter," he said. "You once said you didn't like dirt in your eggs." She wiped her hands on her apron. "You remember that," he nodded. "I remember everything you say." She didn't respond right away. Then, "I used to think no man would ever listen to me again, not unless he wanted something." "I want something," he said, her eyes met his, wary and open all at once. "What? Your mornings, your winters, your yes." "Whatever you'll give." She moved toward him, slow but sure, until her hand pressed flat against his chest. "And if I don't know how to give all that, I'll wait," he said. "But I'll be here." That night she reached for his hand as they watched the fire burn low, not out of fear, not out of need. Just because she wanted to, and for Isaiah, that was everything. Winter settled on the valley with a hush that muffled even the wind. The snow deepened day by day, blanketing the hills and softening the sound of hoofbeats, footfalls, even the creak of the barn doors as Isaiah pulled them shut each night. The new house held firm against the cold. Smoke curled steady from the chimney, and the warmth inside was more than fire could account for. Marabeth had taken to humming while she worked, not loud just enough to notice. It was mid-January when Isaiah first heard it, kneeling by the hearth while he mended a crack in the stove's pipe. Her voice wasn't trained, but it carried something honest, something that made him pause with the wrench in his hand. "You always hum that same tune," he said without looking up. She straightened from where she'd been rolling dough. "It's an old hymn. My mother used to sing it while she made soap." He stood, wiping his hands clean. "You never talk about her." Marabeth dusted flour from her fingers. "She died before Phoebe was born. Fever took her in 3 days. I was still young enough to think she'd get better if I just stayed beside her." Isaiah didn't speak right away. He stepped over to the table and set down the cloth. "What was she like?" Sharp-tongued, Marabeth said, a faint lift at the corner of her mouth. "But she loved deep." "You always knew where you stood with her. I think she'd like it here." He nodded once. "Then I'm glad you brought her with you." That evening, she sat close beside him as he read a passage from a tattered book of essays he'd picked up years ago in Missouri. Her eyes followed the words, her head leaning against his shoulder by quiet degrees. When he finished the page, she didn't ask for more. She just stayed there, her fingers resting on the back of his hand. February brought a sickness to the valley, a slow, clinging cough that made its rounds through nearby ranches. Isaiah rode out to check on the McCowan family 2 ridges over and came back with news that their eldest boy hadn't made it. Marabeth listened with her jaw clenched and eyes fixed on the floor. She turned toward the children's room before he finished speaking. "I need to boil water." Isaiah stepped aside, but later that night, as the children slept and the fire burned low, he found her sitting at the edge of the bed, shoulders rigid, hands curled in her lap. "I've seen too much loss," she said without looking up. "I can't go through it again." Isaiah crouched beside her. "We're keeping warm, we've got food, and we've got each other." Her voice cracked. "That's what makes it worse, the fear of it being taken." He reached up and touched her cheek, his thumb rough against her skin. "Fear don't mean you stop living." She didn't answer, but she leaned into his hand. By March, the days grew longer again. The snowpack melted in uneven patches, revealing the brown underneath, brittle but waiting. Isaiah and Marabeth took turns tending the calf pen as births came quick, the season early and brisk one morning. As Isaiah returned from the barn, he found Marabeth spreading a patchwork quilt by the fire. The children were outside gathering kindling. She turned as he entered and held out a small wooden box. He took it carefully, lifting the lid. Inside lay a straight razor, oiled and clean, alongside a folded length of homespun linen. "I found it in the back of the wagon," she said. "It belonged to my father." Isaiah looked at her. "You're giving it to me." "It's not a gift," she said. "It's a place in our home, that's what I'm offering." He closed the box and set it on the table. "Then I accept." April came green and full. The children ran barefoot again, their feet toughened from last year's summer. Phoebe helped Isaiah plant onions. Peter followed Marabeth with a small broom, sweeping the porch she finally admitted she liked on a morning bright with sun and scent of thawed earth. Isaiah stood beside the house, hammering a new hinge onto the smokehouse door. Marabeth came from the well, her sleeves damp, her braid falling loose behind her. She stopped a few paces from him. "I've been thinking about the future." He set down the hammer. "So have I." She looked toward the pasture where the hills rolled soft and wide. "This isn't just a stop along the way anymore." Isaiah stepped closer. "It hasn't been for a while," her voice dropped. "I want to build a life with you, not just a roof and meals and chores. I want to grow old with you. I want Phoebe and Peter to know what it feels like to be safe every day." He reached for her hand. "I've wanted that since the moment you looked me in the eye and told me your name." She pulled in a breath and let it out slow. "Then marry me, Isaiah," he laughed, low and full. "I was going to ask you this Sunday." She smiled, the kind that starts in the heart and works its way up. "I beat you to it." They married beneath the cottonwoods as their leaves came in pale and trembling, the children standing on either side holding wildflowers. No preacher came, only their neighbor, Mrs. Laurens, who had been widowed twice and said vows better than any man. Isaiah wore his best shirt. Marabeth wore her mother's brooch. Phoebe placed a ring carved from bone onto her mother's finger, and Peter handed Isaiah one made from a coin Isaiah had hammered flat and polished. The sun shone warm through the trees, and no one spoke louder than they had to. That evening they sat on the porch together while the children chased sunset shadows in the yard. Marabeth leaned her head against Isaiah's shoulder. "It's strange," she said. "What is? How still joy feels." Isaiah kissed the crown of her head. "That's because it belongs here." "Same as you," she turned her face up to his. "Always," he brushed his thumb along her cheek. "Always." The sky faded to indigo. The house behind them held laughter and warmth. The land stretched out before them, quiet and sure, waiting for the next season, and they were home, all of them. At last,